Hey everyone, Warwick's here. So we're going to look at the Death Knight talent trees that were released by Blizzard, the Dragonflight talent trees. I'm going to do this video a little bit differently. I'm not going to break down a video for each spec. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to basically hit on the high points of each tree. I've kind of already looked over the Death Knight talent trees a little bit to kind of get an idea of what we're looking at. So we're just going to kind of speed through, talk about some of the major important things that I think are really good, or the things that I think could be using improvement. Just kind of as a first reaction, first impression of these trees. So let's go ahead and get started right here on Wowhead with the baseline abilities. Basically, let's look at the ones that are bringing back. The most interesting one here, of course, is Rune Strike, which hasn't been around in God knows how long. It hasn't been a thing forever. Basically, it makes it so that you get a guaranteed attack off no matter what. You just strike the target for physical damage. Costs 1 rune, generates 10 runic power. It's going to be an interesting filler, I think, to some rotations. Or it may not be useful at all. Like, I don't know how it's going to fit in most of the kits of the DKs, but I find that interesting. Everything else, no surprise. Death Coil, Death Grip, Rune Forging, Dark Command, Death Gate, Pale Horse, Path of Frost, Death and Decay. Sorry, let me move it up. I just saw that I was on the camera. But yeah, Rune Strike here at the bottom. Interesting choice. I think this might be something that would be useful more often in PvP than it will in PvE. Just because, like I said, I don't know where all of these are going to fit into the rotations of DKs in PvE situations, considering, you get basically guaranteed to be hit, but you have Obliteration, you have Scourge Strike, you have Heart Strike that all fill a niche in each spec's rotation. So interesting. So let's look at the Death Knight class tree. And they picked 3 abilities that I don't think surprise anyone: Chains of Ice, Death Strike, and Raised Dead for Frostblood and Unholy specifically. The thing that's interesting about the Raised Dead is that it is not the Death Knight or the Unholy specific Permaghoul. So when you initially specialize into this, if you're planning on going Unholy, like you're leveling a new Unholy Death Knight, it's going to be a little bit before you actually are able to get any of the Permaghoul stuff, which is going to be on the Unholy tree itself. The second row, again, nothing surprises there. Mind Freeze, which is your interrupt. AMS, which is one of your defensive cooldowns. And Improved Death and Decay basically makes it so that while you're in D&D, you get additional targets. Though the numbers are different here. Heart Strike with 3 because it already hits 2 passively. Obliterate hits 1 additional enemy when it already hits 1 already, so you're only getting 1 extra target cleave there, which kind of shows that Death and Decay is not that important for Frost. And of course, Scourge Strike hitting 5 additional enemies for a total of 6 inside Death and Decay. Those of you that are Unholy veterans know that Scourge Strike inside Death and Decay is so very valuable to the spec. On the third row, on the Frost side, we get Icebound Fortitude, no shocks there. Here in the middle, we get Blood Scent, increasing Leech. Cool. That's kind of the way between Death Strike and Leech. That's kind of the way that DPS DKs in particular kind of survive. Veteran of the Third War, increasing stamina, no surprise. Now they did put Suppression, which increases your avoidance by 3%. Right here between Blood and Unholy, so I find that interesting. Down into Wraithwalk Sacrificial Pact combo choices. So like as Unholy, you're gonna want this, like you're gonna get basically a free 3% avoidance as DK, which I find really interesting. And then a new one, Brittle. Your diseases have a chance to weaken your enemy, causing your attacks against them to deal 6% increased damage for 5 seconds. So obviously very influential for Unholy, since it's on the Unholy side of the tree. This is new to me, at least. It wasn't around in BFA or in Shadowlands, and of course wasn't around in Wrath when DK was first released. So this could be returning / new thing. I find it interesting. Fourth row, no surprises here. Blinding Sleep, Permafrost, Death Pact, Rake Wolf, Sacrificial Pact, and none of these should surprise you. It's your utility and mobility. But Unholy Ground here on the far right, I think is interesting. Gives you 5% haste while you remain within Death and Decay. So again, for Unholy and for Blood, this will be basically a free 5% haste added to your character. So very nice. Row 5, you get Merciless Strikes here on the Frost side of the tree. Frost, of course, relies heavily on crit, so no surprise that they put a crit boost over here. AMZ in the middle, of course, one of the big cooldowns that Death Knight brings to the table. And then Might of Thessarian increases strength by 2 and 4% chance, something that I think all 3 specs might also want to be messing around with. I'm already kind of seeing potential builds here for for both Frost and Unholy that I think are going to be very interesting to move into. 6th row, you get here on the Frost side, getting Chains of Ice affecting one additional enemy nearby. With Cold Heart being a talent that's in the Frost tree that I think is going to be very important. Chains of Ice being like a 2-target cleave situation for Frost Death Knight, I think only enhances their niche of being, you know, kind of that 2 to probably 5 or 6 target cleave, and then anything beyond that, you might see Unholy kind of fill in the reins again. And then you get your first choice node here in the middle of the Frost row, either Runic Empowerment, which is going to be each runic power you spend has a 20% chance to instantly grant you a rune. This is what Frost DK has now. Or you get Runic Corruption, which is the Unholy DK side of things. Getting, you know, which they have now, which increases your rune regeneration by 100% for 3 seconds. This is, I think, a really interesting choice for how you want to get your rune refunds. Smarter DKs than me will probably do the math on which one is going to be better for each spec, but I like this choice personally. I think it's really interesting. You get Anticipation, which is the conduit now. You gain RP when you Mind Freeze and reduce the cooldown by 3 seconds, which is an addition to it, which I think is neat. Asphyxiate does what it does now. Death's Advance does what it does now. Anti-Magic Barrier, the same as the talent right now, just giving you CDR on AMS and giving you amount absorbed and duration increase. Good. And then the typical Control Undead here on this row, on the end of this row, I think is very good here, where we're at on the Unholy side, so to speak. And then we get our Unholy Death choice node of Death's Reach or Grip of the Dead. I think this is really interesting for, you know, a slow versus, you know, mob control. So just a quick example is you could see the slow being very useful on things like Necrotic Week, Bolstering Week. But on a week like Sanguine, you're going to want to take, you know, Death's Reach to get able to get those mobs out of Sanguine, so you minimize the healing that they're doing. So viable choices on both sides. And then Enfeeble is a slow on your ghoul and increasing the damage you deal. It says increasing the damage they deal to you by 15% for 6 seconds. That's interesting. So it's a slow, but you take more damage. That has to be a typo, I think. All right, on the 7th row, get a Icebound Fortitude reduction, no surprise. Assimilation, another sort of AMZ boost. And you get RP based on the amount absorbed, so obviously very good for Blood. Maybe not so much for Unholy and Frost, but I think an interesting talent nonetheless. And then, of course, Lichborn being what Lichborn does now. They did not bring over the Conduit, which gives Lichborn a DR, so just it's basically a leech push is what you would use it for. It's a pseudo offensive / defensive cooldown. It's like a weird hybrid in PvE. Row 8, Icy Talons on the Frost side, no shock. Horn of Winter, no shock. Improved Death Strike. Basically, this is leveling perks and the cost reduction all baked into one talent that you're getting now in Shadowlands. No surprise. Willen and Necropolis, fine. And Unholy Bond basically increases the effectiveness of your Runeforge effects, which I think this is interesting. The problem with this talent, like, it's interesting as a concept, but I think the problem with this talent is that you're basically only using 2 Runeforges still. Like, it's Razor Ice for Frost and then Crusader for all 3 specs. Until they do something to make something like Stoneskin Gargoyle or Hysteria or whatever the case may be, until they can make them worth something, I think it's just going to be like, you'll take this because if you can get more strength and stuff like that, like, you're going to take it. But I think they really need to evaluate the Runeforges and kind of look at them and see what they can do to kind of buff the ones that haven't been used really ever. All right, row 9, Runic Continuation, no surprise. That's a Frost thing that they have now. It's a talent. Rune Mastery, consuming a rune has a chance to increase your strength by 6 for 6 seconds. That's very interesting off of Horn of Winter. So an interesting choice there. Blood Draw, fall below 30% health. You drain health from any nearby enemies. It can only occur once every 3 minutes. So basically, it's not a cheat death, but it's like the frenzied regen conduit that druids have right now, where you fall below a certain percentage and it automatically procs. It's just another way for blood DKs to live forever. And then you get Death's Echo, basically giving an additional charge to all your utility. So great, love that. And then on the bottom row, I'm not surprised by the abilities that we're seeing here. Empower Rune Weapon, giving it even more haste. than what it does now, because it's 10% I think now, so it's 15% as a row 10 talent. I think that's good for Frost. I think they'll definitely be using it, and you get an additional charge of it. It looks like if Empower Rune Weapon is not talented elsewhere on the tree, this grants 1 charge of Empower Rune Weapon. So does that mean you get 2 charges? That'd be interesting. A-Bomb Limb, I don't think anybody's surprised this is coming back down the middle of the Blood tree. Obviously very useful for Blood, but very good for the others. And then Soul Reaper on the Unholy side, just kind of confirming that Blizzard is moving in the direction of making Unholy really valuable as an execute spec, because there's just a lot of stuff that leans into it. So overall, the Death Knight tree, a couple of newer-ish talents potentially, at least new to me, that I think are very interesting, but overall I don't think there's anything that's a surprise. The choice nodes I think are all very good, the 2 of them that are there, and I think they put some things in some interesting spots that I'll need to go in and dig more into once we can get a calculator built out, whether it's Wowhead or someone else doing it, and playing around with the builds a little bit. I'll have more feedback on it. This is just in a reaction to the initial talent trees. Once we can actually start making builds, then I'll start probably making videos on some potential builds there for DK. All right, let's look at Blood Death Knight on this side of the tree now. Heartstrike at the top, no shock. Morrowind and Blood Boil being on row 2, so no shock. Foul Bulwark is a talent that's not really taking a ton right now because of, I think it's on the same row as Willen and the Necropolis. So being able to get Willen and the Necropolis and Foul Bulwark is just going to make Blood DKs even more defensively tanky. Crimson Scourge is their proc right now, so no shocks there. And improved Blood Boil, giving an additional charge of Blood Boil. All of these are things that are, with the exception of Foul Bulwark, but all of these things in the first 3 rows are basically leveling perks that you're getting now, with Foul Bulwark being a talent that you can easily access now that Willen and the Necropolis is in the Death Knight tree itself. So overall, the first 3 rows, very happy with them. Row 4, Bone Shield increases your haste, which is something that it does now, so no shocks there. Heartstrike damage increase, no shock there. Blood Fortification, giving you that extra stamina and the damage reduction. It's what you get for just being Blood DK now, so again, no surprise. And Rune Tap, which unfortunately it's not off on its own branch. It's got some good synergies with it and the rest of the tree, which we'll talk about in a minute. So you still might be forced to take Rune Tap, even though nobody that I know actually uses it a lot. On the 5th row, Blood Tap does what Blood Tap does now. I love Blood Tap, so I'm happy to see it stick around. Reinforced Bones, giving more armor from Bone Shield, 10% more armor. I think that's good. I think this is kind of compensating for the fact that the armor got nerfed in BFA Season 1 and was never compensated for. Of course, Blood DK is good now, so who knows. Leeching Strike, Heartstrike heals you for 0.5% health for each enemy hit while affected by Blood Plague. So this gives gives Blood Boil in particular some reason to be in the kit. Obviously more than just to, it's an AoE, basically a free resource AoE thing to give AoE damage, but also gives your Heartstrike when you're inside Death and Decay some self-sustain for you on a spec that's all about it. Vampiric Blood, big cooldown, does what it does now, no surprise. Hasty Bargain, this is a talent. I think this is the Relish in Blood talent now. So just been renamed, but grants haste when you get Crimson Scourge. Cool, good. Death's Caress does what Death's Caress does now, although it does generate 2 Bone Shield charges, which makes it interesting for single target. You can run in Death's Caress, get 2 Bone Shield charges, and then, as we'll see later on down the line, you can then Dancing Rune Weapon, and you basically have enough Bone Shield charges to maintain you for a while without having to use a Marrow Rend right off the start. All right, and then we get our first of 3 choice nodes on row 6. You get Blood Drinker versus Consumption. I think this is good because you get a single target option in Blood Drinker versus AoE with Consumption. I think this is good. I like the fact that they're doing single target versus AoE. It may seem very generic and very easy to do, but these are the types of things that I think talent should be able to do. Lean into certain playstyles or lean into single target versus AoE situations, depending on what content you're doing. I like this. Second one, Mark for Blood versus Tombstone. Again, I think this will also be good overall, although I think Tombstone probably wins out more often than not here, especially since a lot of the Crimson Rune Weapon synergies that we've seen in the end of Shadowlands are sticking around. Mark of Blood may still be okay. Particularly, it's only on 1 enemy, so it has to be on either fast hacking enemies or it's going to be on a situation where it's like pure single target where Tombstone doesn't have a ton of value. But I mean, getting an absorb shield versus getting a heal on auto attack swings, like, I think the choice is easy. So this Mark of Blood probably needs to be buffed in some way to be able to be more effective, because I think in this choice you're just going to take Tombstone all the time. And then a third one, Voraciousness versus Bloodworms. I think this is a really good choice. Voraciousness, much more viable for single target because it gives you that more burst healing out of Death Strike and the extra leech, so very good sustained single target. Whereas Bloodworms, I think, is going to end up being... You know, actually, this is really just choosing how do you want your healing to be. You want it to be more active through your Death Strike, or do you want it to be more passive through Bloodworms? Not single target AoE, because I think all of this is going to be perfectly fine. But I like this choice too, because it's either you're choosing active healing versus passive healing. Again, I think Bloodworms ends up being the choice most of the time, but there might be situations where people want to take Voraciousness. You know, just making sure you're basically Death Striking every 8 seconds so that you can maintain this 15% leech buff and just be even more tanky. And then you get Relish in Blood, basically heals you for a small amount of health per bone shield charge, and you gain 10 running power, no different than what it does now. So this talent up here, this Hasty Bargain, I think might be a conduit that they brought back. So row 6 I think is really good. The Relish in Blood is kind of whatever. Like I said, it's on the row with Rune Tap and Death's Caress, so like there's potential to potentially skip this side of the tree over here. Like these 4 talents may not be all that great overall. Now in row 7 it is Heartbreaker, which is very good for single target or for AoE situations. That might be the only reason you'd come down this side of the tree, unless you can kind of come down here and then come back up to grab this and skip these 3 talents, because I think all 3 of them are pretty skippable. If you can go back up to grab something like Heartbreaker, I think that would be worth, but if you can't go back up for any reason, then you'd probably just end up skipping all 4 of these talents, unless you just feel like you really need any and all of them for any reason. But of course you get Hemostasis. Let me this up just slightly. There we go. Hemostasis right here does what Hemostasis does now. It's been a staple talent of Blood DK forever. You always take it. It's just so good. It's just ridiculous. So, you know, you take it. Improved Vamp Blood gives you even more healing and a longer duration on it, so it makes your biggest cooldown even stronger. We like that. And then you get Ossuary, which is current passive at level 58. Basically, the reason why you want to maintain 5 Bone Shield charges is because of its passive. It basically gives you Death Strike 5 Runic Power, and you get an increasing Runic Power pool total. So you go from, I think their baseline 115, so now you're up to 125, which is what you get now. So this row, very good. I think almost everything on this row is really nice. Question is, can we get Heartbreaker without having to waste 4 talent points or 3 other talent points? That'll be the big question. Rapid Decomp, Dancing Rune Weapon, and Gorfine's Grasp. No surprise in any of these. These are all things that are around now, so no surprise there. Again, definitely want to grab DRW. That's just going to be one of your most important abilities when you're coming to Blood. All right, on the 9th row, we got some interesting choices here. I like Shattering Bone. Basically, it deals damage when you get a Bone Shield charge consumed. So this is with triple effect inside Death and Decay, so a very offensive-focused ability. I like that. Anything that can help Blood DK damage is good by me, even though right now they're doing too much. But, you know, who knows what that's going to look like in Dragonflight. This may be a mandatory talent. It may be just you're comfortable in the content you're in, or you're on farm and you want to push your damage as much as you can, see what happens. Heartrend basically gives you reduce the runic power cost of Death Strike by 10 and an additional healing based on your missing health, so this just makes Death Strike cheaper and more powerful. Never say no to those. Always like having more powerful ability to sustain your own health. Crimson Rune Weapon is back just off of the Dancing Rune Weapon talent. So this is the current legendary that Blood DKs are pretty much using universally. It's back now as a talent. I think this is a great decision. So good. Tightening Grasp, same as what the talent does now. And Red Thirst, same as what the talent does now. So you get Red Thirst not as a bottom tier talent, but you can get it as potentially a good choice here. And then on the Bone Storm row, basically is what I call it Bone Storm. Bone Storm does what it does now. You get Everlasting Bond, which gives you another charge, summons 1 additional copy of Dancing Rune Weapon. This is the 2-piece of Blood DK's current tier set, so good to see it back. Purgatory is Purgatory, and then Unquenchable Thirst Basically, you store an active portion of your Death Strike healing. When Vampiric Blood expires, you splatter nearby enemies, dealing 100% of the stored healing as shadow damage. So this talent is interesting because basically it synergizes with Red Thirst very well because you get to use Vamp Blood more often. But basically you want to pull up RP. At least my interpretation of how you'd play this is you pull up RP, hit Vamp Blood, smash Death Strike all that time that you can while Vamp Blood is up. As soon as you can, hit it, whether you need the healing or not, because you're just going to get that healing stored up, and then you end Red Thirst and you explode, and then you get Vampiric Blood back quickly through Red Thirst. You can do it all over again. So overall, I think the Blood Death Knight tree is really nice. They brought back some really important synergies with some potential new options here that I think are very interesting overall. I think Blood Death Knight, if this talent tree stays relatively the same, obviously they'll tweak and tune numbers, but at least in terms of options, I think this makes Blood Death Knight a tank that I think a lot of people are going to enjoy. And when Blood Death Knight is good, a lot of tanks are happy because Blood Death Knight is, I think, the majority of people's favorite tank. Alright, let's move into the Frost Death Knight tree. So row 1, Frost Strike, no shock. Obliterate and Howling Blast, no shock. Killing Machine and Rhyme, no shock. Again, the first 3 rows are just the absolute core rotation stuff of Frost DK. Unleashed Frenzy, this is a conduit in row 4 on this side right here. Unleashed Frenzy is a conduit right now that basically makes it so that Frost Strike increases your strength by 1%, stacking it with 3 times, so you get 3% strength for 6 seconds. This is a popular conduit in obliteration builds right now, so the fact that it's coming back, and Blizzard seems really adamant on kind of doubling down on obliteration versus Breath of Sindragosa builds, this does not shock me that it's here. Runic Command increases maximum RP by 5-10%. You'll get this probably for both specs, but it'd be more valuable for Breath of Sindragosa than it will be for Obliteration in my mind. But even Obliteration and more Frost Strikes with Unleashed Frenzy, I think you're going to be in a pretty good space overall. Here, improved Frost Strike, more damage, fine. Remorseless Winter does what Remorseless Winter now does. This is kind of, I'd say almost more than Obliteration. This Remorseless Winter is the core ability of Frost DK, just because everything revolves around it in a lot of ways. 5th row, improved Obliterate, more damage, cool. Pillar of Frost, your big cooldown, cool. And improved Rhyme, increases Howling Blast damage done by an additional 75 to 100%. I'm assuming that's based off of Rhyme procs, which I think is the thing that happens now with the Howling Blast and Rhyme, so no surprise that these are here. Row 6, we get our first choice node of Frigid Executioner. Obliterate has a chance to refund 2 runes versus Rage of the Frozen Champion, which is a legendary coming back. Obliterate has a 15% chance to trigger Rhyme, and Howling Blast generates 8 runic power while Rhyme is active. So both of these talents offer, I think, different things. You can lean into the more smashy Obliteration style build, or you can get the runic power build up if you're looking to unleash a lot of, say, Unleash Frenzies, or even if you might be a Breath of Sindragosa, you're going to want that Howling Blast generating runic power, because the more RP you can generate, the better your breath is going to be. Improved Killing Machine, that's the leveling perk that we've got in Shadowlands, making Obliterate do frost damage, which is good. And then we get the next of 2 choice nodes, so we get Inexorable Assault, which is kind of the Obliteration focused talent, and then Cold Heart, which I mentioned earlier, with Cold Heart 2-target cleaving. This, I'm assuming that when you 20 stack and you Cold Heart with the 2-target cleave talent, it'll hit both for the same amount. So some interesting choices there. Inexorable Assault, obviously very good for the Obliteration build. Cold Heart has always been a staple of the Breath of Sindragosa build. The next choice node is Avalanche versus Frozen Pulse. I think this is not really a choice, unfortunately. Avalanche is just really good. It's really good for AoE damage. Whereas Frozen Pulse, if you're dumping runes a lot, then this is potential there. But it relies on your auto attacks, and Frost has never been like a super fast auto attacking spec, say like rogues are. So I just don't see Frozen Pulse finding a place overall unless they do something to buff Frozen Pulse. Go from there. Biting Cold is a legendary that is coming back into the mix as a baseline talent. Good. And this is, I think, one of the most interesting changes to Frost Death Knight is that they made Chill Streak a baseline ability. It is no longer a PvP talent. You can get this for PvE purposes. Obviously, Chill Streak is going to be very good in Mythic Plus, very good in PvP on stat groups. Raid situations, I think it's going to be very fight dependent. But basically, you get 9 times, and cost 40 runic power, so you do have to use it. spend your runic power on it. So it may not be the greatest thing for breath builds, but it might be an ability that you use outside of your breath window. So if Breath of Sindragost is on cooldown, you don't really have the Unleashed Frenzy conduit, say, because you don't use Frost Strike a ton when you're outside of it. You can use Chill Streak potentially as a runic power spender, depending on the cooldown of Chill Streak. I don't remember what it is off the top of my head. But this gives you an opportunity to potentially have a runic power spender outside of breath, and for obliteration builds, this can almost, depending on the cooldown, this will fill the gaps in between your, give you something other than Frost Strike to hit when you're trying to spend runic power. I really like Chill Streak coming in as a baseline Frost Death Knight ability. I think it really helps the spec overall. Because they were using it in BFA when you would get Blood of the Enemy? Whatever the PvE one was that allowed you to get a PvP talent of choice, everyone was using Chill Streak. Because it was just so good in Mythic Plus. Because, it bounces 9 times, and I think it does more damage as it hits more targets, so that 9th bounce is like the most powerful one. It just ends up being a very strong way to get some really good AoE damage. Anyways, moving on. Murderous Efficiency does what it does now. It's the talent that obliteration builds favor. Might of the Frozen Wastes. This is what is in place to give two-handed obliteration basically its place without falling too far behind. It's the two-handed scaling, essentially. Enduring Strength. This is, I think, the old Icy Citadel BFA Azurite trait that has come back. Basically, when Pillar of Frost expires, you gain 10% strength for 6 seconds after it. And then when you get Obliterate/Frost Scythe critical strikes during Pillar of Frost, it increases that duration by 2 seconds. So you could, in theory, with a certain build setup that was happening a lot in 8.3, have almost permanent uptime on this buff, simply because you were able to get Pillar of Frost up quite a bit. Frostwhelp's Aid. This is another BFA Azurite trait that is coming back into the mix. I loved Frostwhelp's Aid. It made the Ice Cap builds, along with their Enduring Strength, viable. And I was always a big fan of the Ice Cap build because it's just kind of simple, smashy, Fury Warrior style fun. So take that. Gathering Storm does what Gathering Storm does now. Power Rune Weapon. This is where it gives you basically an additional charge. So you get 2 charges of a Power Rune Weapon. If you take it here in the bottom of the DK class tree, and you take this over here, 2 charges of Empowered Rune Weapon, which means you can get, that 15% haste for quite a long time. And you're going to get it even more on-demand rune regeneration, specifically. You get the runic power too, but, Frost doesn't care about runic power as much, but you really want to focus on those runes. Sorry, it's a little bit down here. So it's this right here. And then we get our choice note on the last end, Piercing Chill. Basically, I think you'll take this, and if you need more short-term burst, you get more damage from each chill streak each time they are struck by it. So it's good for small target cleave situations where, it's only bouncing between maybe 2 or 3 people. It's going to do more damage to those targets. And then Enduring Chill gives it a longer bounce range and has a chance to bounce a ridiculous number of times. It's 9 by default. With this, you could be looking at anywhere between, you can get unlucky and get 10, or you can get as much as 18 or 20. And you just have a chill streak just bouncing forever in a long AoE sustained pack. So interesting choices. I think that Piercing Chill will probably be the default that most people will take, but until we learn fight design and Dragonflight for raids and Mythic Plus, I think that Enduring Chill may actually find a place. Glacial Advance, that's what Glacial Advance does now. Bone Grinder. Basically, this is kind of the obliteration talent now, but modified. Basically, you gain a stack of 6%, or 5% crit strike, and then your next killing machine consumes the stack, granting you increased frost damage for 10 seconds. So, interesting little talent. I like this one. It plays really well with the obliteration build, I think, in particular. It's all basically about consuming killing machines, so anytime you can do something that gives you more killing machines, this talent is going to be good. Everfrost, this is the current conduit, coming back as a talent. Good. Frost Scythe, back as well. No surprise. Next to bottom row, Cold-Blooded Rage. Frost Strike crit strikes have a chance to grant killing machine over here. I like this. I think this is really good for the obliteration build, since they lean much more heavily on Frost Strike. And with high crit, which Frost in general, no matter what build wants, this is a chance to get you a lot of killing machines, which means even more powerful and strong obliterations. We take that. Frostworm's Fury does what Frostworm's Fury does now, no surprise. And then Invigorating Freeze, Frost Fever crit strikes increase the chance you gain runic power by an additional 5-10%. very obvious synergies with Breath of Syndragosa builds. I think it's no surprise these talents are where they're at. And then on the row 10, I think definitely the only spec so far that we've seen out of 2 classes, but 7 specs, that has a row 10 choice node where you can do Obliteration, which is kind of the current Obliteration talent, where basically when you have Pillar of Frost active, you're basically just obliterating Frost Strike, obliterating Rhyme Proc, Howling Blast, and then you get a Killing Machine, you obliterate Frost Strike, obliterate Frost Strike. Basically, that's kind of the thing that you're doing throughout that process. Or you can run Ice Cap, which basically makes your Obliterate, Frost Strike, and Frost Scythe crit strikes reduce cooldown of Pillar of Frost. I think this is really cool. I think this would be a very interesting choice. And then Absolute Zero, I think is very underwhelming as a row 10 talent, because 50% cooldown I think is nice. Freezing the enemies is a very popular PvP aspect of it, so I think you'll see PvPers take this. But from a PvE standpoint, getting it from every I think it's a 3-minute cooldown to 1.5 minutes cooldown, there's value in that, but compared to the other 3 choices on this row, I think it's just underwhelming. And then Breath of Syndragosa being Breath of Syndragosa, it does everything that it does. So overall, with the Frost Tree, I really like this Frost Tree. I think it adds a lot of good depth to both gameplay styles. It's something that I was kind of worried that in Shadowlands there really isn't that much depth to it. With these talent trees, they've been able to add that depth to the Frost Tree that wasn't there before, so I'm a big fan. And finally, the Unholy Death Knight talents, Festering Strike at the top, no shock, Curd Strike, and here's your improved Raised Dead. This gives you the Permaghoul. So if you remember, talents start at level 10, and you get this one automatically. So you get 1, 11, 12, 13, 14. So the earliest that you could get your Permaghoul is level 14, which if you're leveling a Death Knight may not be the best feel-good moment. For those of us that are going to already be max level, this shouldn't be an issue at all, because you're already level 60. When you get these talent trees, you're going to be able to get a lot of them and then add the other 10 to it over time. On the third row, Sudden Doom, which is their current proc to make Death Coil / Epidemic, costs no runic power. Outbreak is the main ability that you use to apply your plague. So again, these top 3 rows, no surprise, is the core of the Death Knight gameplay. Row 4, Replenishing Wounds. When Festering Wound pops, it generates an additional 3 runic power. This is really interesting. It makes the RP generation for Unholy much higher. It's already got a pretty good one. It's now even higher. I'm not sure what to think of this, but you're gonna take it because of what it gives you down in other spots in the tree. So, but hey, anything that allows you to do more Death Coils, more Epidemics, we take that. Improved damage on Festering Strike, no shock. Infectious Wounds. This is basically making it so that your Festering Strike gives you that sort of ability to do anywhere between 1, I think it's 2 and 4, because it applies 1 by baseline, or it's 2 to 3, and then you get a chance to potentially go on a 20% chance to get anywhere between 5 and 6 potentially. So you could Festering Strike once, max out the wounds, and then be able to use something like Apocalypse or just spam Scourge Strike after that. So I like this talent. The less that you hit Festering Strike, in my opinion, is Unholy, the better. You should really only do it to apply wounds, and if you can max out those wounds quickly, it saves you 2 runes that you can spend on Scourge Strike or on whatever else comes out. I think it's just Scourge Strike that really uses it. Row 3, let's see, row 4, we're on Infectious Wounds there. Of course, we just talked about that. And then Epidemic, the AoE runic power spender. Again, I think you're taking it because it's just got usefulness all over the board. Row 5, more Scourge Strike damage, no shock. Harbinger of Doom, this is the talent that allows you to get even more sudden, you can have sudden Doom procs going even more. I've never been a big fan of this talent just because I think I tend to cap runic power a lot already as Unholy, even without talenting Harbinger of Doom. So just being able to get more free RP spenders, I just don't see a value in that. I think this point might be better spent elsewhere. Dark Transformation does what Dark Transformation does now, and Deadly Coil, giving you runic power reduction cost in Death Coil from 50 to 40. That's a leveling perk that you get right now, so no surprise. Clawing Shadows, the 15 row talent, coming back on its own end here. So again, You're probably going to use Clawing Shadows in all the situations that you use Clawing Shadows for now. It's when you have wounds on the target, but you have to spend significant time away from the boss. This has a 30-yard range on it, so this allows you to still do damage, still pop those wounds, get that extra RP, all that fun stuff. Pestilence, another talent that's back, probably going to function the same way that it does, basically only guaranteeing 1 wound on a target for the duration of Death and Decay. It's never been great, but potential there. Then we get our first choice node, which I think is an interesting one here. Unholy Pact, which is the Hell Chains Azurite trait, it's coming back. And then Defile, which is what Defile does. You're seeing it run in Night Fae builds right now. I think this is an interesting choice. It kind of is a playstyle choice. Do you want your Death and Decay to kind of be that, kind of core part of the rotation, or do you want to focus more on like the Dark Transformation side, where you get that AoE and single target damage and that 3% increased strength? Defile, I think without the Rampant Transference being back, as far as I can tell, it's not back into the mix at all through Death's Due. I think this is probably going to end up being Unholy Pact. So I think they either need to do something with Defile to make it so that it's worth grabbing, or you're going to end up seeing just Unholy Pact be the thing. Maybe they make Defile do the Rampant Transference thing while inside targets inside Defile that are hit by Scourge Strike give you 3% strength, capped at maybe like 15% or something, whatever the case may be. And then it sustains itself for like 6 seconds after Defile is over. Our next choice node here, which is right here, Bursting Swords versus Ebon Fever. Again, single target versus AoE choice. I think this is perfectly fine. I hope they fix Ebon Fever and the weird scaling that it does now. They gotta do that, otherwise you just could see people take Bursting Swords all the time. And then Infected Claws, which is the AoE 15 row talent. We take that. It's gonna be good. We like that. And then All Will Serve gives you that single target skeletal minion. So this is actually interesting, because then you could have your ghoul and you could have a AoE wound applier plus a single target, with I think small cleave ability on All Will Serve, and you just kind of maximize minion damage. I'm not against this. Row 7, Pestilent Pustules does what it does now. No big shock. Unholy Command, damage dealt by Death Coil reduces the cooldown of Dark Transformation by 1 second. This is the deadliest coil legendary right now that you see sometimes used in pure single target situations. Now in Shadowlands and Seppuku. Army of the Dead, no surprise, improved Death Coil, gives it 2 target cleave. So much like Chains of Ice for Frost DK, you can get 2 target cleave Death Coil. So if you take this talent, you'll Death Coil on 2 targets or less, and then Epidemic on 3+ targets. So I think that adds some interesting potential to the spec and how you would use it. Plus getting more Death Coil, 40% more damage is an insane number. I'm imagining that gets tuned. But it definitely makes it good for like 2 target situations. So you think of a fight like, let's see, we've got season 4 coming up. So like Huntsman in Castle Nathria, where you always have 2 targets up. That'll be useful. And then Reaping. Basically, this I think is a talent that really cinches Unholy's niche as the execute spec of DK. Soul Reaper, Scourge Strike, Festering Strike, and Death Coil all do more damage below 35% health. So this just makes Unholy one of the better execute specs in the game, because basically their entire baseline rotation is 20% more damage at 35% health or less. Excellent. I'm not against Unholy's niche as a executes kind of single target execute monster, because I think there are options in this tree to really focus more on AoE. So very nice. Row 8, Death Rot gives you basically makes Death Coil also pop 2 festering wounds, and makes the target do increased shadow damage by 4% per wound pop for 6 seconds. So if you pop 2 wounds, it's 8% more shadow damage. Something like Scourge Strike, all your poisons, or your disease popping, if you have like Bursting Swords, that's shadow damage. So like, just really fits into the Unholy kit really, really well. I think this is an interesting talent. I'm not sure how much I'm liking the fact that Death Coil will pop 2 wounds, but again, if Festering Strike is applying 5 to 6 per application, then this may not be as big of a deal, since you're not spending as many runes to Fester Strike up to 4, 6 4 to 6 wounds just because of the potential to get 5 or 6 almost immediately. Apocalypse does what it does now. Unholy Blight does what it does now. Fester Might is back. It is capped much more. Basically, you get 2% strength for 20 seconds, but it does not refresh the duration like it did in BFA, where you were able to get 40 stacks of Fester Might and get something like 50-80% strength. Here, you're going to basically, as you pop them, you're going to it's going to work almost like Iron Fur does, where you're going to gain a bunch of stacks and they're just going to fall off over time. So your strength number will fluctuate depending on how many wounds you're popping at a time. But I think this Azerite trait is really good. I love that it's back as a talent. It's tied to Unholy Assault, which is an interesting choice in my opinion, but is one that I think that if you want to go into a true like wound build, this might be a path that you take, and getting Fester Might is going to be good for that. Frenzied Monstrosity is the legendary coming back in, makes Star Transformation give you attack speed. We don't hate that. Morbidity, basically they are taking more damage per disease they are affected by. Most likely this is just going to be a flat 6% increase, unless they somehow bring Super Strain back in the mix somehow for DKs, whether that's through a tier set or whatever the case may be. Otherwise, this is just going to be a 6% damage increase, which we take. We don't mind that. And then Unholy Aura, and all enemies within 8 yards take 20% increased damage from your minions. This is tied to Summon Gargoyle, so it doesn't surprise me that this is here. We'll have to see if it's something that you want to maybe take down later on down the line, but I think it'll be, if they can make Summon Gargoyle good again, then I think it is potentially a viable build. And then on row 10, Unholy Assault does what Unholy Assault does now. Does shadow damage, 4 wounds on the target, giving you 20% haste for 12 seconds. It's a good ability, it just gets overshadowed by the next one, which is Army of the Damned in the current setup. Basically getting Apocalypse reduction and Army of the Dead reduction, and the Magus of the Dead, which was an old Azerite trait baked into the talent itself. That hurls Frostbolts and Shadow Bolts at your foes, so I probably will still default to Army of the Damned just because I love the way that talent plays. But, I'd be open to looking at both Unholy Assault and Summon Gargoyle, which is, the 30-second 1% increased damage for every 2 running power you spend. So if you're spending a lot of RP, they're going to take 20% more damage from your minions, which you'll have, your Gargoyle, you'll have your regular Ghoul, you could have your Dark Transformation Ghoul, you could have your Army of the Dead Ghouls, your Apocalypse Ghouls. Like, that's a lot of damage coming in from your minions, and it's passive, yes, but at least you're doing something to make that passive damage function. So overall, with the Unholy Tree, I'm very curious to see what guys like Taznak and Biceps Pumps, the kind of DK big brains, come up with. And like I said, this is also something I'm very interested in playing with an actual built-out calculator for. I really like the Death Knight trees. It's definitely kind of putting it in place. Obviously it's super early to make this consideration, but Death Knight is now, I think, seeing these trees, Death Knight is a class that I will be putting on a list of potential mains to go along with Monk, because I'm just always defaulting to Monk being a potential main, but really only if I'm tanking. But if I don't like the way Monk is going in Dragonflight, I may have another tank in Blood, or if I'm ended up being a melee DPS, we may see me back on DK, who knows. But I really like these trees. I'm sorry this video is 44, almost 45 minutes long. So I'm just going ahead and cut it off here. That's the end of this video, guys. As soon as they release more trees, we'll be looking at them over time, probably in more this format, these longer single videos, but kind of speeding through the trees as best as possible while hitting on the things that I think are interesting. So until the next video, I hope you're all staying safe. I hope you're having fun. Keep gaming, and I will see you all in the next video.